You're with Kat Feeney on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland.
Now, you're familiar with the need to slow down around school zones, but what about streets in heavily built-up areas that are really popular with pedestrians? Some of those old streets that were built before cars were even a thing possibly don't properly cater to the mix of cars and pedestrian traffic, never mind all of the other forms of transport that you might find today. Is there a case to be made for lowering speed limits in some areas even further? You might be aware that other jurisdictions in Australia are trialling 30km/h zones. So what's been found? Have these trials concluded? Is there a case or isn't there? Tepi Mclaughlin can tell you a little bit more. Matthew is researching the issue. He's with the University of Newcastle and he's written a piece busting myths about 30km/h zones for the Conversation website. Matthew, great that you could join the program this afternoon. First off, I guess I want to ask you, why are you interested in lower speed limits?
Thanks, Kat. Thanks for having me on. Well, my interest is actually from the physical activity benefits that we can introduce through 30km/h zones. So I've got quite a niche interest in how 30km/h can kind of improve the lives of Australians. But, you know, there's plenty of other benefits out there of 30km/h zones. But mine is, physical activity, because that's where my research area lies.
We might come back to that in a moment. But let's talk about the fact that there are trials either underway or that have been carried out. Just give us a sense of where we're at in Australia right now with 30km/h zones.
Yeah, so we've got 5 states or territories that are currently trialling or planning to trial 30km/h zones. And so for our article in the Conversation, we busted some of the common myths that people are perhaps unsure about when it comes to 30km/h speed limits. And so in terms of how well those trials are doing across Australia, they are only trials and the data is emerging. But some of the early prospects of that data is that they are doing the kinds of things that we want them to do. They are helping with livability. They are helping with moving people around. But if we turn to some of those myths, they are doing what the facts are saying, which is they are saving lives, they are helping to reduce the number of people that are getting injured, then having very negligible impacts on traffic journey times. And, you know, there's all sorts of reasons for all of these little nuances. But if I take the journey times one, a lot of people might be driving along now, listening in, and thinking, 30km/h, that's bound to slow me down. But actually, it's only 30km/h speed limits on local streets that we're talking about. We're talking about residential streets, we're talking about school zones, and we're talking about everywhere that people spend a lot of time walking around, maybe on our shopping streets. And that's actually not the kind of street that we spend a lot of time driving on. So it has very negligible, if any, impact on journey times.
This is really interesting. I guess what I'm curious to find out a little bit more about, and maybe we don't yet have the data on this, but in the Brisbane City Council area, for example, they have installed temporary speed monitoring sites, if you like. A little face smiles at you if you hit the speed limit or gets very upset with you if you exceed it. And that has been seen to have had a positive effect, yet you still see people speeding through that speed sign, which in itself is only a reflection, albeit interactive, of the actual speed sign.
That's a really interesting one, Kat. I think this is where it comes together. So the way I like to think about road safety and kind of building streets that are better for people is like baking a cake. So that one that you just talked about there, the speed sign where it comes up with a little smiley face or a little negative face, that is one of the ingredients in the cake. But speed limits are another one. Pedestrian awareness is another one, and kind of education. Driver training, improving driver training is part of the equation and part of the ingredients. Enforcement of a 30km/h speed limit. We know that we're going to have to enforce speed limits if we introduce them. And then there's all sorts of in-vehicle technologies that are being developed now to improve the safety of vehicles. So there's kind of all of these ingredients that form the cake. And, you know, as with any cake making, the quality of the ingredient also matters. So you can introduce a speed limit like 40km/h and it has some benefit. But 30 kilometres an hour has even more benefits. It's a higher quality ingredient.
Matthew, can you tell us a little bit more about your particular field of interest, and that is the health benefits associated with slower speeds?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is around making our streets safer for people to go and be active in. And not only safer, but more enticing. We know that if you're on a busy 50 kilometre an hour suburb street, that people don't necessarily go out there playing with their kids or will walk to the shops from there. Not all of our suburbs have lovely paths on both sides of the roads. Some suburbs don't even have any paths on either side of the road for our pedestrians. So we know that things like 30 kilometre an hour speed limits can help people feel safer and more attracted to go and walk out on the street and say take that journey to the local shop walking rather than in their car. And so any benefit of doing any additional physical activity is really good for our health, but it's also good for Australia as a whole, because we know that physical activity is one of those risk factors for diseases that cost our health system a lot of money. So it's kind of shifting the conversation not only to safety on the road and kind of reducing speed for the deaths and the injuries that it causes, which is obviously devastating, but it's also to improve the livability of our streets where people feel more comfortable to go out on them.
As you said, other jurisdictions are trialling these lower speed zones. The results are coming in. They are emerging. No doubt, Matthew, you will be speaking with again when we have some more of that evidence and possibly finding out whether or not there's any political will to slow things down. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. We definitely know on political will side of things, we know that 2/3 of Australians are generally in support of lowering the speed limit. And in terms of safety benefits, we're certainly sure that 30 kilometres an hour works, because if you get hit at 30 kilometres an hour, you've got a 90% chance of survival. If you flip that and go to 50 kilometres an hour, you've only got a 10% chance of survival.
Yeah, pretty stark difference there. Matthew, we'll have to leave it. We're out of time. Thank you very much. Matthew Mclaughlin, PhD candidate in the School of Medicine and Public Health at the University of Newcastle. His conversation article is available online.